my guest today is a somebody who I regard as an expert in Caribbean cricket. He's a journalist, he's a commentator, a very familiar voice when it comes to whenever the West Indies are playing. The one, the only Fazeer Mohammed.
Great to be on the show. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Fazeer, for your time. How's things in Trinidad?
Not too bad. It's an unusual place, Trinidad and Tobago, we're coming out towards the Christmas season, and this is a majority Christian nation, of course. So there's a lot of festivities and commercial activity towards that. And interesting with the West Indies just winning that one-day series against England, you're not really detecting too much celebration. I think for so many years, for so many decades, cricket West Indies fans, not just here in Trinidad and Tobago, have almost distanced themselves from what is happening with the team. They care in many ways, but more and more you're seeing that feeling. Well, we're going to lose again, so why bother to get too worked up about it? So you're not getting the sort of reaction that you would have gotten many years ago when the West Indies would have won the international series, or any series for that matter.
I mean, just on that topic there that you've touched upon, is cricket in West Indies a dying sport, Fazeer, or is that a little bit too harsh?
It's very much alive. I suppose it's sort of like a situation where people have just become tired of losing. And just over the last few days, I've been watching a series on Netflix about Sunderland, which is like Sunderland Till I Die. And as many would be aware, Sunderland in consecutive seasons were demoted from the Premier League and then demoted from the Championship. So you would see the stands half empty, but the passion was still there and the intensity was still there. And I think that's the same with West Indies cricket. Many people sort of have preconceived notions about the Caribbean. For the last 30 years, whenever touring teams have come to the Caribbean, you have to answer the same question. Are they strong young black men going off to play basketball in the United States? No, it's just that what has happened is that the interest has diminished, which is only natural when you think of the West Indies losing so often. And I mean, just a couple of months ago, the West Indies not even qualifying for a World Cup. So what you have is a situation where there isn't that sort of huge automatic following that you would see. Deserted grounds are normal now for international cricket in the Caribbean, except when England are there because they come with the Barmy Army. But everywhere you go, you see young people playing the game. Maybe not to the extent that you would have seen 30, 40 years ago, but there's still a tremendous love for the game of cricket. The problem is when you have your flagship team losing so consistently and so often, and there's so much controversy off the field in relation to the administration of the game, it tends to turn people away, and fans may not be there at the ground, may not be there in person, but there's still a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, a lot of intensity surrounding the game of cricket.
I guess the million-dollar question, Fazeer, and I suppose we could talk all day about this, is why do West Indies keep losing? Why? What are the problems? What are the underlying issues?
I would say fundamentally it's a failure of leadership. Failure of leadership, and I'm talking about the administration of West Indies cricket. And we have to talk about our territorial boards as well. And again, this is another one of the issues that many people seem to overlook, that we in the Caribbean, we in the West Indies, are a collection of sovereign territories. Many people would be aware of Jamaica's exploits in the Olympic Games, Usain Bolt and company. And people often forget. They think, well, the rivalry between Yorkshire and Lancashire is pretty much the same. No, it isn't. Yorkshire and Lancashire and all the counties are part of one country, one nation, one state, England. The difference is in the West Indies, it's different territories separated by water in many cases. So you have a situation where the insularity, the parochialism tends to get in the way, and of the administration of the game as well. We've had it from even when the West Indies were in their greatest period of the 1980s. That was always an issue with Ireland, different islands, different territories complaining of victimization and so on. But when we come to the present situation where the West Indies have effectively been in the doldrums from 1995 until the present time, we're talking about a period of almost 30 years, there seems to have been a really chronic failure of our leadership in the Caribbean. We're talking about the West Indies Cricket Board, now known as Cricket West Indies, to be decisive when it comes to selecting squads, selecting the best players, stop chopping and changing coaches, captains, and various individuals. And it's the politics within Cricket West Indies, which seems to conspire against making decisions in the best interests of the game. Very recently, there's been a controversy over the omission of Darren Bravo, for example, from the West Indies team, which I actually agree with, because I understand the policy, if you're going to plan properly, to plan towards a World Cup and qualifying for a World Cup in 4 years' time. But that decision was contradicted by picking someone who was just 1 year younger than Bravo, that's Keon Otley, with limited international experience, and choosing him. So, and also there have been situations where the present chairman of selectors, Desmond Haynes, hasn't seemed as effective in his communication with players as he should be. And I'm not just talking about the selection of the present squad. So what I'm giving you, Saj, is just a fingerprint of the issue. It's a much broader issue. But I think fundamentally, it comes down to the failure of the leadership of West Indies cricket at the territorial level, at the West Indies level, to make the right decisions, sometimes the tough decisions, in the interest of West Indies cricket. Too often the decisions are made to curry favor with the local support so you can be voted back in again as a member of the board and so on. And sadly, that tends to be a really recurring decimal in West Indies cricket.
When you mentioned leadership, it sort of reminds me of the situation in the Pakistan Cricket Board to a certain extent. Chairman coming and going, and it's a bit of a free-for-all. But somehow Pakistan keep producing those players. I don't know whether that's through luck or actual planning. Are the players still coming through in the Caribbean, Fazeer?
Yes, they are. And when you look at the situation, the landscape, you would realize that, again, and that's why I bring up the issue of leadership and management. A lot of the star players in franchise cricket are still West Indian. A lot of them are still involved right now in the T10 in Abu Dhabi. And they're performing well, they're performing brilliantly. Young players keep coming forward, even in the series that has just been played. A young man by the name of Alec Athanaze, someone from the island of Dominica, who made his debut against India in a series where the West Indies lost 1-0 and were really steamrolled in that first test in Dominica. Yet you can see the ability. Shiv Narayan Chanderpaul's son, Tej Narayan, impressed everyone in his first 2 test matches in Australia, of all places. There's a young man by the name of Casey Carty, who got runs just a few hours ago in that clincher in the match against England in Barbados. They're young fast bowlers. There's a young player by the name of Matthew Ford, who at 21 years of age was the man of the match in yesterday's encounter. So they may not be to the automatic levels of a Brian Lara or to that level, but there's still a tremendous amount of talent that is coming through. The problem is we seem to find ways of either causing that talent to become disillusioned with the West Indies environment, hence the option of the franchises. And I think that is a very important situation as well, where previously, if you talk about the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, right up to the 1990s, early 2000s, there weren't really too many options outside of West Indies cricket, maybe county cricket, the odd stint maybe in South Africa or in Australia. But now, with this plethora of T20 franchises, T10 competitions, even tournaments in the United States, which earn a decent amount of money, players, if they feel that they're being treated badly or they're being discarded or there's not the level of communication with Cricket West Indies or their territorial boards, just simply turn their backs and play elsewhere.
It seems to be a case of one step forward and two steps back for Caribbean cricket at times. Fazeer, is that a fair comment?
I think it is, because that's why it tends to be so infuriating. You talk about a West Indies team through this period of doldrums. Yet the West Indies would have won a Champions Trophy 2004, famously beating England at the Oval on an autumn day. Then 2012 and 2016, of course, those T20 triumphs, Marlon Samuels starring in both of them. Yet it's ironic, as we mentioned, Marlon Samuels having just been banned for an extended period, even though he doesn't play internationally again. It just speaks to that inability of whether it's us as Caribbean people, whether it's our administrators, to manage these situations, to keep players attuned to what is required of them, to make them aware of their roles at the international level. So yes, you would see those successes, and in fact, famously in 2016, we all talk about it as West Indians. West Indies won the men's and the women's World T20 in Kolkata, and just a couple months earlier had won the Under-19 World Cup with Shimron Hetmyer as captain, with Alzari Joseph in the team, with Casey Carty also in the team. And many people felt, okay, it's been a very difficult period, but this is now the springboard to a new era in West Indies cricket. And of course, it hasn't happened, to the extent that last year the West Indies failed to qualify for the main draw of the World T20, and now the ultimate indignity of not even qualifying for a 50-over World Cup. So I could fully understand people on the outside looking in being thoroughly confused with what is happening in West Indies cricket.
You mentioned about the 50-over World Cup. Somebody of my generation, growing up, West Indies were the unrivaled kings of cricket, whatever format that was, and to not see them in a World Cup event was not only heartbreaking but incredible, really. I mean, what was the feeling and the emotion amongst cricket followers in the Caribbean of seeing a World Cup happening, a 50-over World Cup happening, and not having their team in that event?
You know, Saj, I made the point earlier that there isn't the level of celebration over this series victory over England, which is the first in the Caribbean since 1998 and the first anywhere since 2007. And that failure to qualify for the World Cup had pretty much the same reaction. You know, you talk to someone and you try to get it out of them, then you see the hurt and the anguish and the anger over failing to qualify. But otherwise, people just wouldn't say anything. They just probably wouldn't even watch the matches, because they're always fearing the worst, and that's what tends to happen. And again, it's the accumulation of pain and embarrassment and disappointment, not just with the playing on the field, but the confusion and the chaos off the field, the controversies which are felt to be thoroughly unnecessary. So not failing to qualify for a World Cup seemed almost as a continuation of that downward trend. Indeed, Carl Hooper, who had just been hired as a batting coach prior to that qualifying tournament in Zimbabwe, saying that we shouldn't say that the West Indies couldn't go any lower, because we found ourselves saying that many times, that, you know, well, it can't get any worse. It can't get any worse than this. And Hooper, maybe he don't regret saying it, said that, well, you know, we really shouldn't say that we can't get any worse, because it can still happen. We may not qualify for the World Cup. So said, so done. And that's the feeling that, you know, people are so very guarded in their optimism, even if they dare to be optimistic, because they feel that, for example, after this success against England, which is really an excellent effort, the West Indies have 2 test matches coming up in Australia in January, and everyone is fearing the worst for that.
I think Pakistan are in Australia at the moment, Fazeer, and we're feeling the worst as well. Fazeer, the 2024 T20 World Cup, obviously West Indies, Caribbean Islands co-hosts along with USA, but already there's some controversy regarding that, with Dominica refusing to host those matches. That's not a good start, really, is it?
It's not a good start, but I actually commend the Dominican authorities for making that decision and announcing it, because we have to remember one of the things that, again, people often overlook is that even when we're the most dominant thing on the face of the earth in cricket, West Indies are one of the poorest when it comes to resources and finances to sustain the game. And for a nation like Dominica, which was utterly devastated by a hurricane in 2017, they're a very small economy, limited resources. Even if they get funding from the ICC via Cricket West Indies, there are greater priorities in many of our territories. I famously recall for the 2007 Cricket World Cup, Trinidad and Tobago, which is one of the wealthier of our Caribbean nations, the administration, the political administration at the time, chose a package known as the Brown package, which featured just a series of group games, and that was it. And people were pretty upset about it, although the explanation of the administration at the time made a lot of sense, because Trinidad and Tobago is not really a tourist type island. Our economy is primarily oil and natural gas and a bit of manufacturing and so on. And therefore, for other territories like Barbados, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and so many others, it was important to have the bigger packages and maybe the final. And it was felt that, look, it didn't make economic sense for us to do what is required by the ICC. And again, in the Dominican case right now, I suspect that what we have as well is that often, and again, I can only give my own personal opinion based on the 2007 Cricket World Cup, that some of the requirements of the ICC are really ridiculous. Because the fact of the matter is that international cricket has been staged in the Caribbean since 1930. I'm not saying that facilities don't need to be upgraded and so on to meet the standards for an international tournament. But I think some of the things that are required, additional facilities for players and officials, and certain requirements, certain guarantees by governments in relation to the taxations or non-taxation and so on. I think a lot of it is basically handing over sovereignty to the ICC, which I think is a complete nonsense.
Well, Fazeer, always a pleasure listening to you, and here's hoping to a recovery in West Indies cricket, and let's hope it's not too far away when we see the Caribbean Kings back on top of the ladder in world cricket.
You know, Sad, we've been saying that for about 30 years and keep hoping that it's going to happen. But every success like the one against England gives you a measure of hope. You know that England are rebuilding as well, so you can't get too carried away. And I think that's where it is. The West Indies are always hoping for the best, but sadly fearing the worst.
Many thanks for your time, Fazeer. Always a pleasure.
Take care.